move across to the other big story of the day, and I'd like to hand over to Navika Kumar for an exclusive interview with India's top legal eagle. Over to you.
Thank you, Hina. And joining me this evening is Mr. Harish Salve, former Solicitor General and legal par excellence. Thank you and good evening, Mr. Harish Salve. Many seasons change, and in India, two things remain constant even as seasons change. One thing is, Hamara constitution and democracy is always facing some problem or the other. Democracy khatre mein rehti hai. And number two, things that don't change, the EVMs are always faulty whenever the BJP wins. How do you respond to these constant troubles that the Indian country, the Indian polity and the Indian democracy face?
You know, I feel very heartened when I hear the noise of Indian democracy. And let me share with you something which Pilu Modi wrote in his book. You know, Pilu Modi was a friend of President Bhutto. They would study together in Cambridge. And he said, Bhutto wrote a letter to him once where he said that he used to always mock the noise and dust of Indian democracy as compared to what he thought was a much easier run politicians had in Pakistan. And he wrote, when I lie in my dark cell all alone, with no democracy now to rescue me from this completely illegal detention, I now realize the value of the noise and dust of a democracy. See, the biggest safeguard in constitution, jab tak ye shor machte rahega, constitution khatre mein nahi aayega. Bhale faltu ka shor ho, and of late most of it is very hard to even comprehend or understand what the noise is about. But having said so, it's good you keep constitution on the front page so that people see. Mr. Paikhiwala, my late guru, used to always say, do not treat democracy as a safe harbor. Democracy is a ceaseless endeavor. So till democracy is live, it is present to our minds, and it is in our consciousness, India is safe.
Mr. Harish Salve, even as the Parliament has just concluded or is concluding the constitutional debate, there is another issue that has come up which seems to be threatening the constitution yet again, and that is the One Nation, One Election report that was also has your labor of love in it. The opposition has taken on the BJP-led government and its allies over the introduction of the bill in Parliament today. According to them, this is an anti-democratic and a dictatorial move. How do you respond to that?
Very interesting. Introducing a bill in Parliament, which requires an amendment to the Constitution and therefore two-thirds members present and voting, how is it dictatorial? By definition, if it is wrong, you will debate it and it will be defeated in the House. How is it dictatorial to bring a law in Parliament? This is not declaration of emergency. I love the way people who wear proudly the legacy of a party which had declared emergency call introducing a bill in Parliament as dictatorial.
Well,
so that's where the contradiction in terms begins. But Navika, I have heard a little bit, for good reason, partly because of pressures of work and partly because of my need to preserve my own mental sanity. I don't follow too much of what is said about all this. But all I've heard up till now is lovely Twitter catchphrases. And I don't have a Twitter account. I don't know social media. I have not mastered the art of one-liners. All I've heard so far is one-liners.
So when people say that this bill, which is now being referred to a JPC, actually goes against federal principles and the separation of powers that were enshrined in the Constitution, I want to ask you, is this bill legally sustainable in its current form?
Let me address first the concepts and then tell you what the bill says. Separation of powers is a new one. It's a nice catchphrase. I don't know whether the gentleman or the lady or the person who used this expression, separation of powers, has read an actual book on the Constitution or has read a red book with blank pages inside. Because separation of powers means when in a constitution different functions are ascribed to different bodies. The judicial function is with the judiciary, the executive, making laws and controlling the executive is with parliament. The seventh schedule divides legislative fields into state lists, union lists, concurrent lists. That is separation of powers. This bill doesn't impinge on any of that. Whether a state government is an office elected in March or November or waits for 3 months and gets elected 3 months later, its powers are not being curtailed. The powers will always continue. Point number 2, there will always be a state government in office. What does this bill say? This bill says once you coordinate the elections. First of all, I have not heard even a reference to the underlying purpose. And the report gives pages and pages of the underlying purpose why it is necessary to have one nation, one election. It is not the cost of the 5,000 or the 7,000 crores. By God's kindness, India is not doing well enough to afford that. The cost of holding elections, the paralysis in governance, and on an econometric model, 1% of the GDP gets wasted every time we have elections. And that's a massive, massive figure. So that's the compelling reason to explore, can we do this? And add to that, Navika, is my fantasy. My fantasy is someday we will come to a landing where we can have at least partial state funding of elections to address this scourge of black money and its play on elections. The government tried to fix it with electoral bonds in a deeply flawed judgment, and I make no bones. In a deeply flawed judgment, the Supreme Court struck it down. There were maybe minor things which needed to be corrected, but anyway. And to say that what is in place today is being an ostrich with a head in the sand. So if someday we have to have state funding of elections, this will set the stage even for an experiment like that. For all this is the plus. Now, what are the changes proposed? The changes proposed are once you coordinate the elections, that will be a one-time exercise. There will be elections to the state, there will be elections to parliament. If either parliament or the state doesn't live its term, the next election will be for the balanced term. And that rule is applied equally to parliament as to states. If states get elected and are stable for 5 years, but parliament falls in 3 years, states are unaffected. Parliament will come back for 2 years and then join the states in the next complete round of elections. So there is no inequality of treatment. Point number 1. Point number 2, if you look at the language of the provisions of the Constitution, there is no minimum guaranteed term, and for a very good reason. You cannot, the Constitution would not countenance a unsupported government, an unpopular government even for a day. That's why the Constitution only gives an outer limit, saying the term shall not exceed. It doesn't say the term shall not be lessened. So all that is being said is the term shall not exceed 5. That is unaffected. But if there is an election held in the middle, it will be held only for the balance period. And there is already an existing provision that if there is less than 6 months to go for the state, you can wait for 6 months, have president's rule, and have the government. So this is not something so dramatic as is being made out. And these are the minor changes to the constitutional provisions. I haven't heard a compelling argument which says because of a feature A, B, or C, the principles of federalism are violated. We as constitutional lawyers, we understand what principles of federalism are. And federalism is not just that the union and the states are equal, and everything is the same. Nothing else has changed by this. No powers of the state are taken away.
True, But there are a couple of things that would change. Number one, the question arises on whether regional issues will be overshadowed by national issues. Whether
That's not a constitutional guarantee. What issues will be run in elections? Samvidhan khatre mein hai, was the national issue or the regional issue? Was it run in the union elections? Yes. Was it run in the state elections?
okay, the other question that is raised is this is going to be anti-regional parties and will favor national parties, and that is a concern because a large part of India's polity is made up of regional parties.
I have a very, very serious concern over this kind of a logic because it completely berates the Indian voter and the Indian voter's intelligence. The Indian voter, and these are my very personal political views, please, I don't claim any great knowledge to politics. Today, Congress party is looking increasingly like a regional party. And that's a result of its performance in national elections. And who has done that? The Indian voter has reduced it to that. The Indian voter knows whom to vote for and whom not to vote for. The Indian voter knows if an election is held within the state or if the election is held outside the state. Today, I dare say, if the kind of popularity which Aam Aadmi Party enjoyed, if the previous election had been held a year earlier or a year later, I don't think it would have made a serious difference. Maybe a few seats here or there may have been different, swayed by the national sentiments. But I think the Indian voter is so aware. And I have, on the street, heard conversations saying, ठीक है, मोदी जी है, हम उनकी इज्जत करते हैं, पर वो थोड़ी हमारे चीफ मिनिस्टर बनने वाले. People are conscious. There are state issues. You want a good man to rule your state. You will not vote only for the party whose top leader, who's going to be the potential prime minister, is amazing. But the man who's potentially going to head your state is hopeless. So, please, this kind of an argument just doesn't wash. With me, I think the Indian voter has taught the political class over and over again a lesson which they are not willing to learn.
Mr. Harish Salve, just today, when this bill was being voted on for introduction and for sending to the Joint Parliamentary Committee, a two-thirds majority was needed for this to be passed. And according to the opposition, 461 members were present. BJP should have got 307 votes in favor if the two-thirds yardstick is applied, but they got 263 and the opposition got 198. So did the blue litmus test of the two-thirds majority actually apply even today? That's the question raised by many.
See, an issue is raised today. The provision of the Constitution applies to members present and voting. There was no voting today. There was no voting today. See, this is what I'm saying. When will our
there was voting. Even for introduction of the bill, there was voting.
That is for introduction of a bill. You don't require, for passing a constitution amendment, you require representative. You need the speaker's permission for the leader of the government to lay a bill. But the voting whether or not a bill should be sent to JPC is done by Parliament as a matter of procedure. In law, the bill has been introduced in Parliament. When JPC is Parliament, Joint Parliamentary Committee is Parliament. It is just that a handful of members will consider and give their report to the larger Parliament so that the larger Parliament can focus on the issues. After a group of parliamentarians has heard the different stakeholders. So the Parliament is still seized of the bill. And Parliament can well say, we don't want it.
All right. So, but there is another issue that often I think impacts political parties, which is the issue of when you do a one-time exercise of increasing the term of some assemblies and reducing the term. I don't think anybody has a problem with increasing the term of any assembly. It is when a popularly elected government, elected for 5 years, has to reduce its term. Is that unfair to those states and those parties?
What happened when, because of political squabbles, they fall? So, first of all. Secondly, maybe the JPC comes and says, for the one-time coordination, do not decrease any terms. Give the extra term to those who are not falling in line. Maybe that's the solution.
Okay.
That's what I'm saying. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The basic idea is, once you are coordinated, then try and keep everybody together.
And what about...
And if that is for compelling reasons, which are given, or you may say the reasons are not good enough, this is all hopeless, it's a waste of time. I mean, it's a possible view. Nobody is saying that our view is the only possible view. But Twitter one-liners are not going to help. Calling it some politician called it a weapon of mass distraction. Lovely expression, makes no sense. Or somebody said this violates basic structure. Why? Or somebody says, oh, this is against federalism. I would like to hear an argument why it's against federalism. So I'm a student of constitutional law. I'm not a student of politics. I'm a student of constitutional law. I have not heard anything. I'm sure maybe something which I hear, I may sit back and say, oh, we hadn't thought of this. Sorry. It stripped a wire. So, but this is what debates are about. This is what democracy is about.
So Mr. Salve, what about the fear that some people have that this will make the Election Commission all-powerful? There should be no appointments to the Election Commission. There should be election to the Election Commissions. How do you respond to these?
Then somebody will have to run the election to the Election Commission. So again, you'll blame the EVM used for the Election Commission.
Well, let's wait and watch what happens to this. But there is another issue that comes up. And to my mind, this is about freedom of speech. It is about law and order. It is about an individual's rights. I want to ask you about the issue of Allu Arjun. The man, a Southern star, a man whose film is out there earning crores and crores in just a few days. The man was arrested by the police in the state of Telangana. His claim and his team's claim is that he was arrested from his bedroom. He's got bail now, but now what we are hearing is that this bail will be challenged in the Supreme Court because one individual lost her life and another individual was hurt in a stampede outside a hall where this film was being screened. Many questions are rising about whether the star is responsible or the government of the state was responsible.
Navika, I'm very sorry that somebody has died. Mismanagement of such venues in India goes on and on, despite I was the specially appointed public prosecutor. We fought the case. We got the unselves convicted. We got the convictions upheld. And in a judgment which my extremely limited knowledge of law and intelligence, I have not been able to understand. The Supreme Court let off the senior most unsel on payment of a fine. That's how seriously we take our accidents. We keep having public demonstrations and functions about Bhopal. But we still haven't changed our law of industrial accidents. It's exactly the same. An industrial accident in which hundreds will die, you still have the maximum 3 years punishment rule. So what is happening today is governments do not want to own up to their responsibility. And the media base for blood. So the easiest thing is, what is the softest target? The liberty of a citizen. And I'm sorry to say, and I've said this before and I'm saying it again, Indian courts have lost their soul when it comes to citizens' liberties. Why should anybody be arrested at all unless he's guilty of a violent crime which needs his custody? ED goes on arresting people left, right, and center, which is the complete, I use no other word, which is the complete nonsense. The Supreme Court upholds the PMLA law, which is a crazy law. The way the Supreme Court has interpreted is mind-boggling, but it is there. And everybody is arrested. One of your colleagues, Arnab Goswami, was arrested. Why? Because somebody had committed suicide and he left a dying note saying, I have not been paid. So tomorrow, if you hire somebody and you don't pay him, and he, because of his financial pressures, commits suicide, you go to jail. This is the kind of thing which is going on in our country, day in and day out. And today, what grabs headlines? You catch hold of a cine actor and throw him in. Why? Because the struggling chief minister who's wanting to gather popularity is trying to show his muscles. Say, see, rich man, poor man, caught the fellow, throw him in jail. Why I am such a toughie? And what are the courts doing? The courts are meant for these kind of situations where the executive behaves in this completely reckless fashion. What did the court do? The man should have got bail straight away. The fact that the government has the temerity to say we will take a case like this in Supreme Court shows how lightly people take Supreme Court.
Well, there is another
they should be
case.
Petrified of going to Supreme Court.
There is another case where a techie has committed suicide because he was being tortured by the entire separation process. It's a situation where everybody is asking these questions, that should somebody be given 120 summons by a lower court in a family separation case and settlement of alimony?
See, that's what I'm telling you. Our personal laws require major overhaul. They are completely out of sync. Look at your suicide law. This was meant to prevent women from being killed. The law is so absurd now. Today, a lady commits suicide. Human beings have various reasons to be in a depression. It's not always your spouse who's to blame. Let's assume your spouse is insensitive or whatever you feel at the end of the road in that one extreme moment. You commit suicide. All somebody has to say is, I saw them fighting once, and finish. The spouse goes to jail. What sort of a law is this? So, but we have this at the altar of populism. We have made these kind of laws, and the courts play to the gallery. I'm sorry to say, it breaks my heart to say. I come from the Krishna Iyer school of jurisprudence, where Krishna Iyer said bail, not jail, is the rule. Where did this change? Where did India change somewhere? Where have we become such a heartless nation? Today, what happens is an accident happens. The media is saying, what is the government doing? The government catches hold of somebody who's iconic, throws him in jail, and says, justice done. Is pre-trial arrest a punishment? But today, what will happen? And let me tell you what will happen. All this arrest will be done 3 months from now. Everybody would have forgotten about this. And 2 years from now, everybody will be acquitted.
But Alu Arjun's case, let me come back to you and ask, if the matter is challenged in Supreme Court, will Harish Salve be open to questioning the Supreme Court and protecting the liberty of an individual, a citizen of India?
He has genuinely fine lawyers available to him. I'm sure in Supreme Court he doesn't need the likes of them. But I feel strongly about all this.
On that note, Harish Salve, thank you very much for joining me here on the news. Always a leading light, explaining issues in a manner that every common citizen can understand, for being that legal teacher to the citizens of India. Thank you very much, Harish Salve. With that, we'll slip into a short break. More news on the other side.